some measure of protocol. What we're going to do for this afternoon panel, by the way, I'm Ken Medlock. I'm going to be serving as the moderator of this panel. I'm a fellow here in the Baker Institute. And I also teach energy economics at Rice, which is why I missed some of the morning sessions, but I'm very glad that it's sort of all going to be available on the web so I can sort of catch up. But I was teaching this morning, so. We're going to sort of change the order up a little bit from what's actually indicated in the program. And that was by request. So, and the way we're actually going to handle this afternoon panel is I'm going to ask each one of the speakers to come up and say a few words. And then return to their seat, and we'll just sort of go through the 6 speakers in that manner, at which point I will stand up and ask everybody to come forward, so I'll have a few words to say at that point, and we'll just initiate a discussion. It'll make it a little bit easier for the 6 panelists to see everybody else's presentation, quite frankly, so we'll handle it that way. So real quick, let me just run through the list of who will be speaking, and then I'll just kind of let the chips fall where they may, so to speak. We'll actually initially hear from Anel Bay. And by the way, I typically don't sort of read people's bios because I figure everybody here can read, and you can do that for yourself. But suffice to say, it's a very distinguished panel that we have here to discuss the issue we have in front of us. So after Anel, we will actually hear from Powell. I'm going to do my best to say the name right. Oleknowicz. And then we'll hear from Jerzy Melaniuk, and then Ian Brzezinski, followed by the Honorable David Johnson, and then Pat Wood. So, Anel, if you come up and get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Good afternoon. It's great to be here, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be part of this panel this afternoon for the discussion, and I really want to thank the Baker Institute for hosting this. It's a great opportunity for all of us to be able to get together and talk through the dialogue of discussion about the great opportunities in Poland. I just have really a handful of slides to talk about some key messages and issues, and really just to tee up some of the conversation that we can have during the panel discussion. First, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Marathon. We've been in operations over 124 years. We're a global company in 3 business segments: exploration and production, integrated gas, and oil sands mining. We're a newly independent oil and gas company, and we're focused on safety, we're focused on the environment, the communities in which we live, and profitable growth. We are about a $17 billion market capital company, and our headquarters is in Houston, Texas. Specifically, Marathon is in key positions. We have significant positions in 4 key resource plays in North America that you can see here on the map. In the Bakken Shale, in the Niobrara, in the Anadarko Woodford Shale, and in the Eagle Ford. And basically, Marathon got into the resource plays in 2006 and started shale development. And we took decades of learning from conventional hydrocarbon development and added to that specific new competencies in infrastructure, regulatory, in geology, in drilling and completions to be able to take on the challenges in shale gas. And we saw the opportunity in Poland and said we're going to transfer that expertise and that skill, and we'll be able to use that in the Poland shale play. So the key messages this morning that I wanted to tee up, these are just 3, I'm certainly welcome for more, are one, a visible and open, streamlined regulatory process. And basically, the number of wells that needs to be drilled are tremendous, and I think we've heard a lot about that this morning. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in terms of how many wells need to be drilled. So anything that can be done to streamline the process, to continue to encourage the investors and the producers and the operators to drill another well is going to help this play significantly. 2, our open markets and competition for the development of gas infrastructure. And again, the key that I'll say about this is it's the long-term production of any shale gas play that's the critical key issue to knowing the potential of it. So we're asked that question a lot, and I'm going to show you another slide on that to talk about it, and I'll probably just repeat this again. But I'll just tell you, it's all about the production. So I know this morning we talked about exploration wells, and we do have to drill exploration wells, absolutely. But it is about tying those wells up to a pipeline and monitoring that long-term production that is critical to knowing the success of the play or not. Because we need to know how much gas, how much hydrocarbon is actually going to come out. And of course, the last bullet to me is very critical. It doesn't matter what company you're from, what size you are. All operators have to commit to the highest operating standards and best practices, because these resources can be developed safely and responsibly. We are doing it today everywhere we work, and we can do it in Poland as well. And why are we doing that? We're part of the community. We're the neighbors. It's where we live and work. It's what we do. So my next slides are really just some more information to give you that backs up part of the key messages. And again, just more information, so I hope we can talk about it on the panel this afternoon. This is a map of Poland. You've seen this before, and I think I've outlined most of the concessions there in gray and yellow along this northwest to southeast fairway within Poland. In the yellow are the Marathon concessions. We have 11 concessions across the fairway in 3 different basins, the Baltic, the Podlasie, and the Lublin Trough. And we intend to drill wells there from a drilling depth of about 3,000 to 4,000 meters. We do expect to see some liquids, we think, in some of the plays, both gas and liquids. And I know that question was asked this morning. And we're hoping we see both phases in there. One thing I wanted to show you was just a scale comparison of the Poland play with just one play in North America. And you can see from the inset map, I have put the Woodford play from the state of Oklahoma. It's at the same scale as the play in Poland. You can see right off the bat that the Poland shale play is probably 4 times the size of the Woodford play. Inside that blue box in the Woodford play, if you can see that there, this really isn't. There you go. There are about 250 horizontal wells within that blue box alone, and that's about 250,000 acres. If you look at the scale then of that 250,000 acres in the shale gas play in Poland, you can see there are less than 50 well penetrations really across the whole play. So again, a substantial number of wells need to be drilled, need to be tested, and need to be produced before we're able to say what's there and do we really understand the potential. And the other point that I wanted to make on this slide is really, we talk about this whole shale fairway and the 3 different basins, and in some ways they're very similar, and then there's some differences in all those geologic basins. A key point I'd like to make is that it is not going to work across the whole fairway. It's just not going to. We see that in the other basins that we work all over North America. And so what we talk about is finding the sweet spot. And how are we going to find the sweet spot? And you can see that's the sweet spot right there in the Woodford play in the state of Oklahoma. And where potentially could that sweet spot or several sweet spots be in Poland? So it's very prospective. I'm hoping we're finding several sweet spots across there. And Marathon is very excited with the fact that we have acreage in all 3 basins across the play to be able to test that. So this is that question again, when will we know? When will we know the potential of the shales in Poland, of how big they're going to be, how much it's going to produce? And basically, it's after multiple wells are drilled, tested, and producing. And it's that producing, it's that production that's the key. So again, I know it's kind of backwards in some ways. In a conventional play, we drill an exploration well, we drill an appraisal well. We think we have a pretty good idea about what the play is and the understanding of the field, and we move towards development and hook it up to production. In the unconventionals, we need to drill those wells. We look at all the data that we have, and we need to hook it up to production to see how much is going to come out over how much time. That is absolutely critical. And so the tying into the infrastructure is going to be critical in this play. Down the left side of the slide, you can see I just gave you an overview of basically what we do in a pre-drill situation. We shoot seismic. We've shot 2D seismic on all of our blocks. That's something we do before we drill. We need to understand the structural and tectonic history. We just don't want to drill next to a fault. We want to make sure we know where all those faults are. Then we're going to need to drill many vertical wells. And what are we doing in those vertical wells? We're taking a significant amount of data, primarily rock data, but we also need to study and understand the fluids because that's going to help us on the completion. We need to understand the geomechanical properties, the mineralogical properties of the rock data so that we can understand where's the most favored zone. So depending on the criteria that we select for target zones, we'll drill an adjacent horizontal well in that one zone. Now say we see several zones. That's great. That means 3 or more horizontal wells, however many zones that we've identified, to land a horizontal in, then to test that interval. And then of course once you've designed the completion and the testing, then you need to hook that up and monitor that production. Now, maybe you've drilled a well in the Lublin Trough. We're getting ready to drill our first well here, the Orzehof, in the Lublin Trough. And the section that we're targeting is down here, the Silurian and Ordovician. We're all targeting the same section. But within those sections are going to be key zones that look better, for whatever reason, than another zone. And I hope we see several of them, like I said, so that it entails us to drill horizontal wells in every one of those favored zones. But you can then see how many wells need to be drilled just in one area, much less across all 3 basins. So the key then is watching those successful wells and, like I said, trying to find that sweet spot. And the longer you can see that production over time, then you know what parameters you might need to change on your next wells so that you can enhance that production and optimize it. This is just an example of a cycle time variation between the Woodford play in Oklahoma that I brought up earlier and in Poland. And of course this is a complete generalization. In the Woodford play you can see basically from the time you drill to the time you hook it up to a pipeline and begin sales is about 4 months. This is not unusual. This is a play that's been active a long time. We've gathered a lot of data and there is a significant pipeline network available to tap into. So that's something that's quite easy to do, although I would just say my colleagues in the Woodford wouldn't call that easy. And in Poland, we're looking at the time from drill to fracking the well. Can it be anywhere from 4 to 5 months? And of course, I'm just assuming that the equipment is ready and available to be fracked, that you're not waiting on any equipment. And this is taking longer, and that's okay. This is expected. This is a frontier play. In the Woodford, we're not coring that many wells. We do have a lot of the data. We do know what we want to change in those. We don't know that in Poland, so we need to capture a lot of data, take a lot of core, look at the fluid analysis, and be able to select where the horizontal zones are. The key factor in this, though, in the regulatory environment, is every change we make requires dealing with multiple agencies, potentially different levels within those agencies, and potentially a 30-day approval process. So we need to have a little bit of flexibility while we work these plays, drill these wells, and identify these zones, and be able to move relatively quickly to drilling the horizontal well. And so anything we can do that could be streamlining the process in terms of the regulatory process would certainly be helpful, because at the end of the day, the best thing that can happen is to be encouraged to drill another well and to invest in another well. And I think we saw from the slides this morning, which I really liked, the gas is there. We saw the flare. So we know it's there, and we need to be encouraged. I love to hear the comments. The results look promising. That's when you want somebody to say, let's drill another well. Let's find out. And so the more we can do to streamline that process and drill more wells and find out is only going to be good for the country of Poland and for understanding the shale play. The only last comment I'll make about this is you can see if you're not adjacent to a pipeline, you can see then building the infrastructure and negotiating the access to that pipeline could take several years. This map is something that everybody has seen this morning. Here's the potential shale gas fairway, and then the main gas pipeline infrastructure in Poland. And certainly the initial wells we drill may be adjacent to some of these pipelines so that we could tap into the pipelines that are there currently, or we may need to build new pipelines. And of course, it's long lead times to install pipes, and anything that can be done, deeming the pipeline strategic, opening up the process so that we can expedite more pipelines is real key. Because like I told you, the critical key to knowing when and how much potential is there is the long-term production monitoring of any shale gas play anywhere. And the reason I think it worked so quickly in the United States and in North America once then the technology was developed for drilling and completion technology is because of the pipeline framework that was there, so that companies were able to hook up their wells quite readily and begin to see that production. And then lastly, Marathon is here in Poland because of the commitment we have in the communities in which we work. We are committed, like I said, to safety, to the environment, and to the communities in which we live. And we think all operators have to be. At the end of the day, we are all working there together, and we will all be judged together. And like I said, we can be stewards of the environment, and we can develop these resources both responsibly and profitably to the benefit of everybody, because there certainly is a benefit to the country of Poland and certainly to the oil and gas industry. Thank you very much.
I didn't disappear. So, thank you very much, Ken. Good afternoon. I am a little bit under stress. First of all, that, I am here the first time in Texas. Being in the oil business since 2002, by the way, which is nothing new for me, but it's that famous place, Baker's Institute, it's creating such an atmosphere that you have to be, let's say, better prepared as a professor also to talk. And I see, the famous people speaking here to that podium, like presidents of the U.S. and others, that may feel more comfortably also. But secondly, that's why I'm under a little stress. It's not a good afternoon, that's good evening. I arrived yesterday evening, so and it's a late evening. Okay, and I will try to do my best, but to go through the short presentation, I think. But that third point of my little stress, that I'm going to talk about a totally different thing we've been talking today about, because we've been talking about energy security and in general about shale gas. By the way, shale gas in Poland. Okay, I'm going to talk about something, let's say, well-fitting energy security, maybe even more than shale gas. I am going to talk about a strategic reserve for petroleum, for oil, which we've been talking since years in Poland without success, but that project is quite well recently developed. So I will shortly present that, not touching the details, because why we are here and wants to talk, we want to learn about strategic reserves, petroleum reserve system. How is that worked? That's the best place, the U.S. and in Texas, that we can get that knowledge. Also, we may during the tour tomorrow, we may see how is that organized physically, so to speak. So once again, I want to underline that I am here to present our ideas, but more we are here to get more from the experience you are, and get lessons which will give us the better position to bring that to the table in Poland and develop that projects maybe better and without such problems like we had till now. So let me see how is that works. The projects, why I'm going to say that we are quite close to let's say to take off with this, because we signed a letter of intent with a company. Francis today here with me, and he will talk shortly about the company. That's a logistic company, and my company, Lotos, Grupa Lotos. And we, of course, having the friends like John Brzezinski also, and others, we try to develop all the documentation which might be ready for the further in the next few months. The let's say general presentations that should include the business plan for this project. So shortly, the companies, Lotos, it's a second the big refinery and oil company. We finished this year one of the biggest in Europe for refinery downstream project. It cost $2.1 billion. So our revenue is over $7 billion, and refinery capacity is over 200,000 barrels per day. So the parent company, my friends will talk himself about that, but by the way, Lotos is a Warsaw Stock Exchange, listed on a Warsaw Stock Exchange company, but State Treasury is keeping 53%, and the rest is floated. The 100% state-owned company, it's a PERN, and this is a logistic company. So this is nothing, I am going to add to that, because I want to learn the picture I got, and I think the picture is right. I am sure that once we go for that project and start with investment, it will look like on a picture, simply like that. But let us see. That's coming from the books. Here on that slide, that's a history. I mentioned about that we started talking in Poland about the strategic petroleum reserves many years ago. Many times, happened that it was quite close that government wanted to decide to step into that. But now I think, I hope that we will step into the serious discussion and start actions and materialize that project. So on that slide, this is the message that we need additional strategic reserve. So we need additional capacity, and we must in Poland enlarge that reserves due to the obligation, and also Lotos and other companies, it's obliged to fulfill that issue, and so that's why we are very much engaged on that process, and we think that we will convince all of the players and governments getting also the political support. So that's another issue. And once we've been talking about energy security, it's wise to remember happens a few times recently that one very seriously when our friends Orlen took over Możejka refinery and Russians stopped crude oil delivery. And another moments for a gas delivery, the interruptions happened. Also, we have to have the alternative to be better prepared, to secure ourselves and be more independent. That's also the clear message. Here on that slide, it's nothing I may add, but only that I may say that choosing salt covers as a method of increasing storage capacity is choosing the most efficient and cheapest way of doing it. And if you like, of course, I am ready to open any questions regarding that, but I think that being, especially here, it's quite a well-known issue. So how is that established in Europe? There are not so many, such projects, but in countries like France, Germany, Denmark, and Norway including, they already exist. And if we go for that project, which is located here. With that location, we'll have the logistically the best connections. The crude oil can be delivered via ships and also via the Druzhba pipelines. And it's also you heard most probably that there is going to discussion regarding the Odessa-Brody somewhere pipeline or connecting pipeline for crude oil here somewhere. That project may bring, let's say, in turn to the more economical idea for such a project, and then it's more logic that let's say this is bringing the better diversification of supplies of the crude oil, even that one coming then from Caspian Sea and down from Arabic countries. Means strategically that project looks like very interesting, but as you saw, there's 7 million tons or even 20 million tons, which is comparison to the caverns you have here. That's like a peanuts, very small, but for our economy, like the Poland is, and neighbors also, that looks like as a enough and interesting project we can develop. So how is that? I mentioned it's located close to Gdańsk, and there's a geologically salt caverns may be established. So the best location we find at above Gdańsk, most probably, but also onshore locations are quite interesting. So once again, when you see that logistics, what I already mentioned, that you may see Brody, Płock, non-existing and pipeline, which may be more logic afterwards economically to build. So that means that the launching that project in the Pomerania area, it may beneficial not only us, Poland, our companies, but also our neighbors, and create a better, let's say, strategic security for this region, for the EU countries. So we feel that project covers needs some, let's say, our support, like a EU, International Energy Agency, and the NATO umbrella, because it looks like as a strategic project for that region, and we've already gotten access to the institutions and good opinion about the project I present. So that's additionally, we want to, of course, we've been talking with the government and getting the government and politician support in Poland, but there are many things that we must consider, like changes of existing rules for strategic reserves in Poland. And of course, such a project like that investment for caverns should be built. It's a project which should be supported by the government. And then we may find financial institutions and other companies joining us to start with that investment. You know, that slide shows that it's like a triangle. We have salt caverns, which we haven't yet, but that strategic reserve can support the security and secure refinery existing, and of course the logistic, which I may say, already have and need some additional improvements only. That's logistically, that place is one of the best we may develop. What I'm going to say here and to ask, you know, that's the, you know, for a future, what we are going to do. We are going to establish the best, let's say, presentations to finish that, and with our friends from the US support also, and may have a presentation maybe not later than the first quarter next year. So getting hopefully full support. We are going to settle the special vehicle to run that project favorably. Of course, being here, you know, thank you very much. All of engaged people from the US, including US government. Thank you, David, and Jan also. Of course, the Polish MBCA is very much engaged in supporting the business with the idea, which is normal. I'm going to say a few words about that relationship. We expect getting here more by that visit, that trip. We expect to have also the better climate to develop that project and convince all of the players and decision makers in the next coming months. So that's what I already mostly covered. The few words to the end of that presentation, because you maybe ask yourself, why I am here and talking about the project, which is not really in line for such a company like the Lotus Group developed. So partially yes, it's giving for the Lotus the better position once we are close to the strategic reserves, of course. But I am the head of a Central Europe Energy Partners, which is a think tank based in Brussels also. And we've been talking about the region, Central European countries. That's covering 11, or including Croatia, that's 11 countries. That's an organization based on the CEOs of energy companies. Not completed yet fully, but getting quite a good position on the EU players and the members. So I was yesterday attending the ministerial meeting, business ministerial meeting, and the IEA Paris, where new energy outlook 2011 was presented, was issued. That very interesting meeting, and I am very satisfied of that, because I got a message that such indigenous energies like coal and also the shale gas and the gas, it's for the next many years and decades, it's an energy source which will be developed. And of course, CO2 reduction is a must, but logically done. Once we've been talking in that region how to support each other, building interconnectors and linking more the Europe West, more mature European countries with that CE region. We've been talking about competition. We've been talking about a partnership. We've been talking about energy mix and solution, common solution for regions. And at the same time, that's also was mentioned in Paris. At the same time, we have individual big players' actions. That's, for example, Nord Stream. The Poland is inside, among two players, Germany and Russians, and the Gazprom. And that's a monopolization rather than building a competitive market. So, and it surprised me, Mr. Schroeder a few days ago, who mentioned during his speech, just we are before opening that Nord Stream operational activity. And first of all, it was announced that now it's the right time to build salt covers on a German side, capacity 5 billion cubic meters, because it's a wise and a logic. So opposite to our LNG terminal. And nothing bad, but okay, we have to think about how to measure our energy security model, and how to, let's say, talk on a EU level about a partnership. And he also mentioned about two speeds of the regions in the EU level. That's CE region, which is 1/3 GDP in comparison to the rest more mature E15. And we've been talking about how to create, let's say, position better ones to support each others and create one common economy model. And Schroeder mentioned that, okay, that's we should think forget one model for EU. We rather develop two speeds economy, forever in that. So therefore, we have to rise up that issue as a very important one. Talking about one common solution regarding the energy security, that's covering energy mix. How to develop, of course, renewable is the first one. What we are going to do with other energy sources, power generation for nuclear, and coal, and power plants, and others. And for each of the countries existing, in EU and the world, we should think how to tackle that issue. Once, every year, the coal-fired power plants in China, India will grow. Also, we cannot damage that in Europe, because that will damage industry. Okay, I a little bit went out of that presentation of the covers, but this is something lying on a energy security model which I love to talk and to work. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to tell something about our group, company PERN in Poland. This is a logistic company, interesting not only for this project, but at all in Poland. It's good to know some more about this company. If you see, here is some details which we are doing. Shareholder is 100% government. In our group is total 500,000 people. I know that this finger is big for us, small for you. Yes, but this is problem with philosophy. If I tell big, you ought to understand small. Yeah. Sea, it is lake. Yeah, and so on. Here is some fingers. I don't want to explain everything very individually, but here is in general activities, our group, core activities, supporting also. You can read this information also. The next one, this is our group, yes. Main company is PERN Przyjaźń SA. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 companies and one company on the way. This old taki per Gdańsk, this is terminal, oil terminal, which is constructed in Gdańsk. It is not now constructing, but we are just discussing about joint venture contract and so on. To get permission, also it's necessary to get permission from European Commission. This is the main reason that it is long-term project. Overview of per group, core activities, you can see. Some figures is in cubic meters, also in barrels. It was very difficult to count all the time, but now we have everything, yeah? It's no problem. Our client, of course, Polish main client is Orlen Lotos. It's very nice to have this both partners together, then Total, BP, Shell, NA, Mercuria. Our nets. You can see that we have main line from east to west, and then in Plock, this is main our headquarters, to Gdańsk, to Naftoport. Some figures about possibility on each line what we can do also shows our possibility. Here is crude oil and fuel oil tanks farm. You can see where is in Poland. According to crude oil, we have 3 farms. Green color in total is more or less 3 million cubic meters. All the time we are constructing new tanks. Typical capacity now is 100,000 cubic meters. This is very modern tanks, swimming roof, double coat, and so on. Now we are going to construct in our tank farm in Plock. Our strategy for the nearest future. Point number 3, salt cover project is here. Yeah? Here is also some information about development strategy for parent group. You can see this also without any additional information. I think it's not necessary to give more. Infrastructure also we want to develop all the time. We are fighting to have new strategy for this. If you look on our port, Nafto port is very close to Lotos. This is very good situation for company Lotos, say true. Because this Nafto port, you can see, can load or overload 2 times more. Like now, this is quite good situation for cover also. It means that from the sea we can use this Nafto port in double. Salt covered province, some small information. Of course, we are going about this minimum level, 7 million here as first step. Total cost is the same. Here was also some about covers also. I think it's enough. The next project, I'd like to show all the activities and to give you information that if you want to work in our country using oil nets, it's necessary to work with us. Quite. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Ian Brzezinski, and I'm the non-oil man in this group. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I bring a background of about 15 to 20 years on working on U.S. European political military relations. And I had the honor and pleasure of focusing a lot of my energy on the U.S. Central European, particularly the Poland relationship. And I see many of my colleagues here in the audience I've worked with over the years on issues of U.S.-Poland military cooperation, Poland's accession to NATO and such. Let me start by thanking the Embassy of Poland and the Baker Institute for hosting this forum and including me, and also thank Marathon and ConocoPhillips for making this forum possible. What I was asked to do was threefold, was to share some views and some thoughts about Central Europe's energy security situation, and I'll capture a lot of some of the themes that came up from our earlier presentations. Second, to follow on Pavel and Jerzy presentations, to discuss how strategic petroleum reserves can fit into the Central European energy equation. And then third, looking back on my experience in the U.S. government, to share with you some thoughts about how Strategic Petroleum Reserve cooperation can and should fit in the U.S.-Poland bilateral relationship. When thinking and strategizing about the Baltic region in terms of energy security, it's important to realize that the Baltic region remains today a distinct enclave within Europe. Compared to Western Europe, it doesn't have the web of east-west, north-south infrastructure pipeline connections that bind the countries of Western Europe together and make it a cohesive energy market. Central Europe lacks that infrastructure, and as a result is a region with limited connections among themselves and limited connections to Western Europe. It's still today somewhat separate from the European energy market. Second, as was pointed out repeatedly, a preponderance of liquid and gas energy consumed by Central Europe comes from a single supplier, Russia. And Poland, I guess, gets 94% of its oil from Russia, largely through the Friendship Pipeline. It's a problem systemic to the region. And third, the countries of Central Europe and their markets lack the magnitude of their neighbors to the west. They're not as big as Germany, France, Italy. And as a result, they don't have the luxury or the flexibility to flirt with questionable deals from the East, and are a little bit more vulnerable to pressures from the East leveraging that oil dependence. It's in this context that, in the context of being an enclave of energy security within Europe, that the Baltic region must confront three challenging energy security realities. The first is one you all know. Global demand for energy is continuing to rise, and that growth will be staggering. 50% over the next decade and a half. And Poland itself, if I remember one of the slides today, I saw, if I caught it correctly, 40% growth in energy demand over the next decade and a half. I've seen forecasts, or I've said over the last decade for petroleum, demand growth in Poland is about 3% a year over the last decade. And I think it's fairly safe to assume that Poland's economic growth is going to continue. It's one of the more robust economies in Europe. And I've seen statistics between 15 and 20% growth between now and 2020 in demand for petroleum alone. A second reality is that volatility, not stability, is going to be an enduring trait of global energy supplies. Look at the two key sources of energy for Europe and the greater Middle East. Russia and the greater Middle East. Russia is not going to be a stable player, certainly not as stable as many expect. Its energy demands are growing, not shrinking. Its lack of reform, and I think it's safe to predict there will be a continued lack of reform when Putin comes back to power, a lack of political and legal reform, precluded from leveraging the potential of that country. Its own shaky stability is underscored by the growing violence we see in the Northern Caucasus. The unrest we see today in the Arab world, stretching from Tunisia to Yemen to Bahrain, Iran for that matter, is likely to be enduring. Well, what we've learned from our cases and our episodes in Iraq and Afghanistan is that each case is different. But if anything is true, it's foolish to assume that rule of law, democracy, and stability will quickly be established in countries with little experience outside of authoritarianism and that feature tribal and sectarian rifts. Globalization has indeed been a driver of unprecedented growth, prosperity, and a global political awakening that's pressing forward the frontiers of freedom. But with that positive change, inevitable as we wish it to be, one has to assume that there will be resistance, unrest, and even violence in that part of the world. And then the third reality is that energy will remain a political tool. Control of energy stands among those powerful weapons in the arsenal of soft power. Energy supply and access will continue to be leveraged by states as a means for political ends, commercial ends, geopolitical ends, or a combination of all three. Just look at the Baltic region, its history. The Kremlin used energy cutoffs in 1990, 1992 to curb Baltic independence. A decade later, oil flows to Lithuania, as Pavel pointed out, were cut off over the sale of a U.S. refinery to a U.S. company. In 2009, we had an energy cutoff to Ukraine from Russia that galvanized awareness of energy security and the importance of Central European energy security. And just last May, we saw Russia use gas prices in an effort to cajole Ukraine to join its economic union. These three realities underscore a basic point in the Baltic region. Energy collaboration is an imperative. And I commend the Polish government for the way it has taken a real lead effort in fostering interconnections across the region, in using its EU presidency to focus more attention on the energy security realities of its region. But let me focus on strategic petroleum reserves. This is one project in this region that I don't think has gotten as much attention as it merits. Energy security discussions often focus on, and rightly so, on diversification of energy supply, energy efficiency, new technologies, green energy supplies, renewable energy supplies. But strategic reserves contribute to another objective that's very important, and that's strengthening resilience to oil shocks or cutoffs. As a Paul Mill guy, when I think of resilience, it's the ability to operate when a core capacity has been denied, and it has to be an important part of the mix in energy policy. We created here in the United States the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, in the 70s in response to the gas shock of that decade. And it's a model that I think holds true for other countries and certainly for Central Europe. Pavel and Jerzy talked about the use of Poland's salt domes for petroleum storage, particularly those in the Pomeranian region. And they, I really believe, can help the Baltic region's growing storage demands. I understand that Poland's storage demands are going to double from about 7.5 metric cubic meters to about 15.5 by 2015. Underground storage of crude oil and petroleum products is environmentally sound. It's been proven here for decades. It's time-tested. Its technology is, I think, unquestioned. It's almost simple in the realm of the energy business today, and it's cost-effective. I understand underground storage is about a third of the price of above-ground storage facilities. And leveraging salt domes in the Pomeranian region could benefit not just Poland, but also its neighbors, the Baltic states, and demand in Germany, Sweden, Finland, and possibly others. You know, when you think about it, it's salt dome storage, salt dome petroleum storage kind of is a rare convergence of commercial viability and strategic necessity. Which leads me to the last part of my little presentation. How can this fit into the U.S.-Poland bilateral relationship? The United States has interests in this, I believe, in assisting Poland develop its strategic petroleum reserves. There are transatlantic dimensions to this. Well, first and foremost, both Poland and the United States and every other European country belong to the International Energy Agency, which fosters collaboration in the management of energy stocks. Secondly, falling back to my background, energy disruptions can undercut the ability of members of the transatlantic community to work together to maintain their solidarity, especially times in crisis. And a Europe that is more energy resilient, a Central Europe that is more energy resilient, can only be a more reliable ally. And indeed, for this reason, strategic petroleum reserves has been a subject of U.S.-Poland dialogues, and Deputy Assistant Secretary Johnson has been an important proselytizer of strategic petroleum reserves to many people in Eastern Europe, and I know many East Europeans have visited his facilities. But now that Poland is moving decisively forward with a plan to expand its strategic petroleum reserve capacity, it ought to become a higher priority in the U.S.-Poland bilateral relationship. And here are some thoughts of how this could happen. Last May, there was a summit in Warsaw. President Obama visited Warsaw. And he added great new momentum, one would say new life, to the U.S.-Poland strategic dialogue. This is the policy umbrella that ensures continuity, integration, sometimes even consistency among the many political, military, and economic and business dimensions of the U.S.-Poland relationship. Strategic petroleum reserve collaboration, specifically sharing of technology and best practices and experience, should be added to that dialogue's agenda. And I think that can be done in three specific ways. First, it's perhaps the easiest step. One would take strategic petroleum reserve cooperation and slap it on to the March 2011 U.S.-Poland Memorandum of Understanding on Energy Cooperation. This was signed earlier this year. It's geared towards renewable energy, but it has clauses in there that easily encompass anything that two governments want to place on energy. That's the easiest way to do it. A more dynamic, perhaps more exciting way would be to establish a separate memorandum of understanding on strategic petroleum reserve collaboration. A second step that could be taken would be to leverage an initiative kicked off in Warsaw by President Obama and Prime Minister Tusk. and that was the U.S.-Poland Business Roundtable. They announced it would convene a high-level U.S.-Poland roundtable that, in partnership with the private sector, would, among other goals, identify and drive forward new commercial opportunities. Now, I understand this roundtable is supposed to convene sometime in mid-2012. It ought to be on the agenda. Moreover, prior to the roundtable, the U.S. and Polish private sectors are supposedly canvassing their respective communities to come up with an initial list of priority projects, priority commercial projects that would serve as the agenda for the convening of this convened roundtable. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, this project ought to be on that list. And third, we ought to leverage the U.S.-Poland economic and commercial dialogue. This fosters a high-level dialogue between both governments to promote bilateral trade and investment and to further bilateral U.S.-Poland economic and commercial relations, including in the energy sector. The Warsaw Summit promised that the two governments will convene an executive session of the ECD sometime in 2012. So those are three initiatives with some deadlines that I think could serve this project. In closing, Poland's Strategic Petroleum Reserve project offers great potential to enhance not only its energy security, but also the energy resilience of its neighbors, and that contributes to a stronger transatlantic relationship. This is a project that's cost-effective, it's environmentally sound, it has the benefit of being commercially viable, it is tangible, it is accomplishable in the near to medium term, which is not true of many infrastructure projects. It's doable. So if I was back in government, I'd be looking at this as a rare convergence of commercial viability, strategic necessity, and an easy win for the U.S.-Poland relationship. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to talk. First of all, these three briefings were kind of right down the line of my briefing. But anyway, I'm not an expert on natural gas, but as a director of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, I can speak a lot on energy security. And that's what I'd like to do today. I'd like to, one, emphasize the importance of energy security. Two, give you a little bit about the structure and of the U.S. SPR that has been developed by the United States, and also talk about a little bit the best practices in building a reserve. Okay, first, let's talk about the need for energy security. There's a critical need. If you look at 1973, we had the Arab embargo, followed in 1979 by the Iranian Revolution, both cutting off oil supplies to many countries. Then in 1990, the Iraq War. And then we have in 2002 the Venezuela strike, cutting off more supplies. And then, of course, for the U.S., hurricanes in 2005 and in 2008, cutting off again. And then Libya in 2011. So what's the future going to be? Is there going to be more Middle East, North Africa situations? Is there going to be more earthquakes or hurricanes? Because that's essentially what we've been seeing a lot of here lately. Yeah, U.S. and Poland economies are both highly dependent on foreign imports and have significant vulnerabilities. Okay? Both the U.S. and Poland are members of the IEA, and both of us are required to store 90 days of petroleum imports. The U.S. has done numerous studies on macroeconomic benefits of oil reserves. And essentially, based on the probabilities of disruptions that's out there, the economic benefits in terms of GDP loss avoidance exceeds the cost of actually building and maintaining oil reserves, especially when you use underground salt technology. Let me talk a little bit about the SPR, ours, in the United States. was established by Congress in 1975 with two missions. One, to protect us from the potential disruption of critical supplies, whether domestic or international. And two, to meet our requirements under the International Energy Program to hold 90 days of stockpile. It's operated by the federal government and managed by the federal government. We essentially centralized ours in the Gulf Coast of the United States. Why? Because 50% of our refining capacity is in the Gulf Coast. It's also the point of entry for 70% of our imports. And it also has access to both marine capabilities and pipeline capabilities, so that essentially we can deliver to anywhere we want and get it on the water and also to the other parts of the United States. We went with crude oil only. Why? Because we had a robust refining industry in the United States. And essentially, we only store high-quality crudes. Okay? The high-quality crudes produce the best transportation fuels. Physical distribution capabilities. We have connected to pipelines. We can deliver to 1/3 of our refining capacity just by pipeline alone. We got 2.5 million barrels of outloading capacity per day by marine terminals. This shows you pictures of our 4 sites. We have currently 4 sites. We have 727 million barrels of capacity. We got 696 million barrels of inventory. That's because we just sold 30 million barrels under the sale. And then we have, that 696 is equivalent to about 80 days of U.S. imports. We rely on 10 days of imports from the industry. A little bit different than Poland, where it's got 14 days of government stocks and 74 days of industry. All our oil is stored in salt domes. It provides maximum safety, security, deep underground, just like everybody has talked about here. Completely protected against lightning, storms, fires, risk of leaks, environmental damage, easy to get in and out. No evaporations, no emissions. And we see thermal mixing of our product, constantly in movement. Our construction cost, we believe, is 1/5, a little bit more than the 1/3, but we see it as 1/5 of conventional storage tanks. And our costs are only 25 cents a barrel per year. This is about 5% of what it costs commercially to store if we would go in steel tanks. Our salt dome operations are very simple. It's all through displacement. You push oil in, you push brine out, and you dispose of the brine. And if you want to push the oil out, you just push water in and it pushes the oil out. We can operate this and deliver 4.4 million barrels a day through our system. Our caverns are easy to develop. Essentially, it takes about 2.5 years to develop a cavern, 4 different stages. We coalesce the sumps, we build a chimney, and then we take and develop the cavern space, and we're able to fill it in. Our salt cavern, we have done many advancements in salt cavern technology. We have 62 caverns, and we use two different. Let's state that again. We use Sandia National Lab to support our geological work, as well as we have used PB energy storage systems to help us out. They've done salt characterizations and assessments. They've done geotechnical analysis, salt dome stability analysis. Essentially, what they have done here is Sandia has actually looked at how many caverns you can actually put in a salt dome and have a stable salt dome. And that's very important when you're looking at putting a salt storage facility together. The other thing we have done is Sandy has developed a computer model to do a solution mining process. You can see how nice a shaped cavern we have. They have also developed an integrated or integrity monitoring system, which they watch how caverns pressure up. And so we have a continuous monitoring of the cavern and its integrity. And if there's a problem, we can identify that immediately and investigate what's wrong. Commercially, there's a number of things that they have done is in both Sandy and PV energy storage systems, essentially looking at thermodynamic gas operating models. And there's also, give me 1 second. The geotechnical modeling they have done, essentially looking at the multiple pressure cycles for natural gas. That essentially these models look at the microfractures that can lead to failure from rapid cycling of caverns. And so anyway, they have developed envelopes for actually designers and operators of caverns so they don't damage the caverns. Now I'd like to talk about a little bit about the best practices of strategic stockpiling. First one is the stock ownership and control. I want to commend Poland on its plan to transition from a largely industry obligation stock holding to 100% government ownership. I think this is great. This is where it should go. Okay, the release of government reserves versus the lowering of industry obligations significantly enhances the transparency and the benefits of a release. And when reserves are released, they must add to market liquidity to really have an effect. And the best way to do this is tender them and put them on the market in a sales process. The second thing is the composition of stocks. The best stocks to hold, of course, are crude. Of course, this depends on whether you have refineries. The United States has about 150 refineries, and you have about 4. And essentially, it's much cheaper to acquire, store, transport, no shelf life. However, refined products can be stored, but they require rotation and are subject to change in specifications. Also, minimize the number of crudes or types of products you store, because the less you have to maintain and maintaining different ones, the cheaper it is. Second, the higher quality crudes have the best results. Essentially, we make more transportation fuels because of our high quality. Another one is physical location of stocks. Now, this depends heavily on your petroleum refining, transportation, import, infrastructure, and geology. Close to refining centers is what we think is the best way to go. Okay? Also, access to marine is very important, especially when you want to get to other locations. Salt storage, you definitely have to look at the location of your salt formations. You need water sources, and you need to be close to offshore brine disposal. Best storage technology, of course. We think salt storage is the best, and glad to see you looking at that. One, keep your costs low. Insurance is worth it if it benefits exceed the cost, and salt storage has the lowest cost. It also has, like we talked about, lowest environmental impacts. It can be used for crude oil. You guys already talked about that. We have actually studies proving that brine disposal into the Gulf of Mexico or offshore will have no environmental impacts. And that can be shared with you. Okay? Salt storage is less attractive a little bit for operating storage as caverns enlarge, and therefore you have to have brine sources to go in and out. And the fifth principle is operational readiness. Rapid drawdown capability is most important. Most eruptions are short, no longer than 6 months, and the immediate response minimizes the economic damage to any country. So therefore, they have to be quick to use. Operational readiness is also important. We look at this in terms of facilities readiness, inventory readiness, and personnel readiness. And we actually do training exercises and make sure our systems are ready. And that's why when we just did this IEA drawdown, it went off like clockwork. And essentially everything worked just as planned and went very smooth. And the last one is our oil fill policies and release policies. As a best practice, definitely minimize the impact on the market. And what we found in backwardated markets where the future prices are lower, we have actually deferred contracts and acquired more barrels for the reserve with not any taxpayer dollars. We have actually added about 10 million barrels to our reserve worth $235 million at no cost to the taxpayer just by deferring 6 months at a time some of the deliveries. Also, the ability to use future market purchases in the backwardated is great. Oil release policies. U.S. pretty much endorses a response policy of early release in large quantities. Let the market determine how much is needed. And the only way you can do that is with the sales process, because you don't accept the low bids. If they don't want to buy it, they're going to bid low, okay? So essentially you have to have that sales process and let the market determine it. And lastly, I just want to say that reserves are really beneficial in an emergency because they really offset GDP losses to the economy. But what if they're not? They're still like gold in a bank. Okay? We bought all our oil for $29.76 a barrel. And right now it's worth about $110 a barrel. Okay? That asset has appreciated. If we change in our economy to a different way and we can reduce our dependence on oil and get rid of it, okay, it can be liquidated and go back to the Treasury. And I just want to thank you. This is one of our security officers. Okay.
All right, I'm last. I'm Pat Wood, and I'd like to say thanks to Amy for inviting me to be here today. It's interesting that today my kids go to Catholic school here in town, and when I picked them up on Monday, the number 2 son goes, Dad, do you know what great event happened 33 years ago yesterday? I sat there and I did the math. I said, okay, I was junior in high school. And he knows he can always stump me, but he didn't get me this time because I remember it was a great day. I was sweaty after track practice at high school. Came and sat down in the car, turned on the radio, waited for my friend, and it was announced at that time that white smoke went over the Vatican. And this announcement came over live on the radio, and he said the name Karol Wojtyła. And everybody in the world was like stumped for about 20 seconds. And we figured out that the Polish guy got elected Pope. And that was kind of so the Catholic school kids all celebrate it still here in Houston. So I thought my Polish friends would like to know that. But how appropriate that Poland and revolution are on the same line today here in the context of natural gas. My background while I'm here is I was a gas regulator for about 12 or so years. I met Eileen Campbell from Marathon, and I also want to thank Marathon and ConocoPhillips for sponsoring today. I think that's a great way to show off our industry and our city and our nation. But I was a a young regulator assistant at that stage at the Texas Commission. And in the United States, the regulatory regime is split between the state, Texas, which of course is a huge gas producer and oil producer, and then the federal level, which I later became the regulator for that as well under President Bush, for the natural gas and the electric power industry. So today I do infrastructure development, mostly in the power sector, but natural gas is my home and my first love, and still I think the best example of a industry that actually has transitioned to be one that is very responsive to the producers and to the customers. And I appreciate, Anil, the nice comments you said about the way the regulatory regime does work here, and I think it does work effectively to help produce and move the product very effectively. So when I get a chance to sit down here in a second, I would anything that I can contribute on how, as Poland moves toward setting up a way to really exploit and develop its wonderful resource in natural gas, I think a lot of the lessons that we learned, some of them we learned the hard way here in the U.S. because we didn't do it right for a while, but we managed to do it pretty well. Gas gathering, for example, regulated at the state level, very hands-off. It's not directly competitive, but it's relatively competitive to have low, small gas gathering facilities and lines go forward. We also, at that point, back when I first met Eileen, we were enforcing a federal tax credit for the development of shale gas, and we call it tight sands as well. And those investments that were made by the taxpayers of the United States, which actually look a lot like the investments we're making in renewable energy today, I should add, were kind of thought, well, I don't know that anything will ever come of this. But at that point, the producers used that extra money to figure out how to do fracking and how to really drill with horizontal drilling. Those things were done, but they weren't really employed in the natural gas shale production at any scale until the late 80s, early 90s. And here, almost a generation later, we're reaping the benefits of that investment. So when I went to the federal level as the regulator there, the head of Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, we had an interstate natural gas pipeline network that was very broad. And it started off very regulated back after World War II, but the United States Congress did a good thing that I hope happens in Europe that we've not done well in electric power, but they put the expansion of the natural gas pipeline network in one agency, mine, FERC, Federal Power Commission is what it used to be called. It's a one-stop shop. You have to get some permits on endangered species and what have you, but FERC runs the show, they run the permitting, and so when a company, and these are all privately held companies, there are no state-owned infrastructure companies of any significant size here in the U.S. in the natural gas industry. When those companies come in and seek a permit, they start at FERC, and within a relatively short period of time, depending on the size of the project, that permit is granted, usually with some conditions, environmental conditions or landowner conditions that are required to make the project work. But I think that's been a very good model, and I've touted it to African nations, to South American nations, and even in Australia, who is a lot like Texas but in a whole continent. We always try to share best practices with them. Two of the other interesting things we did at FERC, listening to this storage, certainly we did storage of natural gas, but the salt dome technology is very much the same, and it's very ubiquitous or very, very common here on the U.S. Gulf Coast. And the use of salt dome, as we saw it being used successfully at the SPRO, at the SPR was copied very, very adeptly in the natural gas industry to provide a very useful form of storage. It's fast. It's been a wonderful moderator for the market price of natural gas. So the technology that you're talking about being useful for oil in Poland is been a very, very useful one for natural gas. Very different rationale, not national security so much, but just economic efficiency. It's been a wonderful resource for us to use. We were the permitting agency for those projects as well as liquefied natural gas. I don't know that I would, from what I understand about the European situation, that we would see liquefied natural gas being exported from Poland. There's probably a huge market within the continental Europe, but LNG is kind of an interesting role as well. And that leads me to the role in the power sector. I think as Germany has now said we're not doing nuclear power, as everybody gets allergic to coal, even though I think Poland has probably one of the greatest supplies. I think U.S., Australia, Poland are like the top three, and Russia are the top four in the world. But unfortunately, that's not a very popular resource in most of Europe these days. But that's going to leave gas and renewables. Well, you can't probably keep that consistently on with wind and solar. Maybe geothermal would help, but there's going to have to be a huge role, a much bigger role for natural gas in Europe's power future than it ever has been, and that it ever was in this country even. So as coal and nuclear take a very much of a back seat in power development in Europe, I think the need for gas, and gas coming from probably not Russia for the reasons that were laid out beautifully by Ian and just a moment ago, I think we've got to really think about what's the most efficient and effective way to use this resource that's in Poland and get it to the rest of the Europe. And certainly, again, I would hope if there are any questions on what's the best way to do that regulatorily, I could contribute to that debate. My reputation, for those of you who don't know me, has been for really demoting or removing the role of regulators as much as possible from these energy infrastructure industries. I think our experience in the United States over the past 100 years has been that government likes to get in the way. Usually it doesn't know the right answer, and oftentimes we waste a lot of money because government was in the way. And so you've got to know when to get out of the way. Sometimes government's necessary. We found out the hard way on that as well. But I think where it is, both under Democrat and under Republican presidents, we've hit a pretty good balance on energy regulation in our country. And I think we've got a pretty good story to tell that I like to tell a lot. And certainly we can always get better. But anyway, there is a role for government. I think that's important to acknowledge. And as we saw here on the map, there are a lot of issues within and between and among the European countries that, you know, the EU has been a very good partner for us to work with. When I was the state regulator, the national regulator, we worked very closely with Canadians. Those things are actually quite easy to do. The international aspect of natural gas delivery is not a huge problem to deal with. We have lovely relations with Canadians. They've supplied a lot of natural gas to the United States over the term that I was in Washington. So, in any event, I look forward to our discussion on the panel, and thank you for the invitation again, Amy.